Scott Van Pelt's One Big Thing. One Big Thing. On ESPN Radio and ESPNRadio.com.
I remember watching an interview on Charlie Rose a few years back where he was talking with Bono about U2. They had just played in Madison Square Garden the night before, and Charlie Rose asked him if U2 was the best band in the world, and Bono smiled. One of my all-time favorite answers. He smiled and he said, "We were last night." I always thought that was great. It wasn't ego. It was real. That's what he thought. Well, this Saturday, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. So was Ryan. A place that several years ago I called the best college town in the United States. Now, predictably, folks in Austin, Texas, in Gainesville, Florida, and from all points, Eugene, Athens, Baton Rouge, they weighed in essentially saying, hold on a minute, Van Pelt. And the truth is there are a ton of remarkable places across the country that could stake this claim. You know that as well as anybody. You spend your Saturdays there every week. But on this particular perfect October Saturday with temperatures in the 70s, with people wearing red in every direction that the eye could see, with brats on every grill and a hopeful feeling hanging in the air, the Badgers welcomed the number one team to Camp Randall. Now, I can never explain the feeling of the welcome that I was lucky enough to get walking past the student section before the game kicked off, but those cheers were nothing compared to the Richter scale registering roar when the Badgers take the opening kickoff back. They never trailed on a night they beat the number one team for the first time in 30 years. The rest of the night, pretty much a blur of kids storming the field and the kind of hospitality and happiness that's a uniquely Wisconsin combination. People were fired up. They demonstrated that up and down State Street as the night bled into the early morning. And it's a scene that I'm completely sure played out in 5 Point, South Carolina the Saturday before when the Gamecocks beat Alabama. But Madison's something that's really hard to describe. It's the best part of the cliche of what makes Midwesterners so much more decent than jerks like me and Russillo and all the rest of us from the East Coast. It's a capital city that loves its team. They were drunk with that and plenty of other things as they toppled the Buckeyes. And while there are a lot of fantastic places all across our country to spend a fall weekend, if you were to ask me today if Madison, Wisconsin is the best of all of them, I would borrow from Bono and say it was Saturday night. You and I were there. We flew home thanks to the folks at Marquee for getting us back in one piece. And it was really if I would have been in an airport connecting yesterday, I would have been homicidal. So it was the only way we could have gotten back safely. So shout outs to our boys in the city at Marquee for making that happen. But what a place. What a remarkable place on the perfect day to be there when they took out the number one team for the first time in 30 years.
You had told me you thought it was the best college town in America. And
You've never been.
And I go in with those expectations, and the place exceeded the expectations.
Really?
It's awesome. And I encourage anyone that wants to just be in a great college atmosphere, but also at the same time, the welcoming manner in which I get Andy North on the sideline high-fiving me, telling me to get my mind right and get focused for the second half.
Well, that's because North's just a Badger. He's insane for the Badgers. It's a lot of fun to watch a game with a guy who's not a kid anymore who still acts like one.
You know, we get criticized every now and then. We know what our show is, and you know our personalities at this point, but there's some listeners out there that think you and I are immature and that we need to grow up. And how do you guys talk about all this stuff? Fine, then call me an immature loser. But you know what happened on Saturday night? I got to be in really the capital of college football for a few hours. And yeah, it was late, but I wouldn't give it back for anything because it was so much fun to see these streets just littered with people that aren't used to having this kind of game. I mean, it's been 30 years since they knocked off number one.
And again,
I'm not saying they're not a good team, but
right, but the part of the fabric of who these folks are, just the idea of thanks for coming to Madison. Thanks for saying kind things about Madison. And as I've said many times, I'm not in the false praise business. I don't say nice stuff to say nice stuff just in the spirit of doing it. I tell you what I honestly believe. And I honestly know that there are great, great college towns all over the place. And I just haven't seen any that are any better than Madison. In this particular weekend, when it was about 70, Andy said come back next week when it's snowing, and it probably isn't that far off. But you combine the day, the night game, the number one team, and the win, and it was just...
And a private jet on the way back.
You know, the term ground zero almost 10 years ago became something that was associated with only awful things. But when you say ground zero for fun on Saturday, that was it. Madison, Wisconsin was it. And we were in the belly of the beast, and people couldn't have been any cooler. And the storyline out of that, as aside from this, is what it did to the big picture in college football. Second week in a row, number one goes down, completely upsets the apple cart for what the BCS numbers are.